Our topic for today is all about the institutional-based correction. So here are some objectives to discuss about the institutional correction, to discuss the importance of correction, to explain the advantages and disadvantages of institutional correction, to identify the 5 models of correction, and also this module or lesson shows and serves as our guide in order for us to understand the prison administration, prison antiquity, to modernity, the influence of Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul, the profile Pope, to tackle about the Philippine incarceration on system and discuss the 5 facts about it, to discuss the 5 models of correction, its individual's basis analysis, and types of every models. Also, this module provide and explain some words that are not familiar to us. Or let's just say, those words that has a very deep meaning that needs a definition for us to understand what it is. Okay, so when we say correctional, it is a branch of criminal justice system that talks about the rehabilitation and imprisonment to those who have committed crimes, or let's just say those who are criminal offenders. So now, let's move on to the correctional facilities. So from the word itself, correctional facilities, meaning it is a place where those who are criminal offenders stay, like jail and prison. So basically, the prison was a good example of it because there are a lot of people who are in prison and stayed for how many months and even years. In relation to correctional, institutional correction refers to where people who committed crimes facilitated and to secure that correctional facilities. Also, it involves incarceration and rehabilitation of an adult. Incarceration is a long-term confinement of convicted and sentenced offenders, meaning this refers to how many years where a convicted needs to stay in a prison or an in jail. Not a month, but it takes a years. For example, the jail. So it is a place where those who committed crimes or inmates will face an investigation and have only a short-term sentences, not the same to others that takes how many years, only a few months. So much for that. Let's move on to the importance of correction. The main purpose of corrections in the criminal justice system is to punish offenders who commit any crimes. By punishing offenders, it will deter any offender from committing any more crimes. Corrections ensure that communities are safe, the fear of crime is reduced, and it establishes the idea of getting treatment. So after punishing those who committed crimes, there was a big tendency that they will not do it again. Otherwise, they will start a new life.
So what are the advantages and disadvantages of institutional-based correction? One of the advantages of institutional-based correction was to lessen the cost. If we're going to compare it to jail and prison, we can say that the community program costs less, and those offenders will help to subsidize the cost. Let's proceed to the disadvantages of institutional-based correction. For the disadvantages, instead of changing offender attitude, they will continue on being a criminal or a bad person if they will be put inside the jail or prison and resources have not kept pace with community corrections growth. There are 5 models of corrections: the retribution, incapacitation, rehabilitation, deterrence, and restoration. First models is the retribution. When we say retribution, it is an act of giving such punishment to those people who committed crimes. So in exchange for the crimes that offender did was to punish that person, for example, the death penalty, or putting them into the electric chair. The retribution has advantages and disadvantages. For the retribution analysis, it includes advantages, which means satisfies public sense of justice, and disadvantages that indicates severe, harsh, inhumane, expensive, tough prisons are costly. For the features, Harshness, severity, no programs, only backward looking toward the crime.
The incapacitation is the most function kind of punishment that talks about those who are offenders that will be put in the prison, or let's just say controlling their freedom so that they will not hurt other people again.
The very main purpose of incapacitation is to stop people from committing crimes towards our society and to avoid hurting or to not harm people.
The incapacitation has its own analysis, which are the advantages, disadvantages, and features. For advantages, incapacitation helps people in terms of safety even if they are in public places. For disadvantages, it is not long-term solution for crime and can be costly and so on. Let's move on to the incapacitation's features. Features are those things and situation or whatever makes those who are offenders incapable of committing crime. So there are four types of incapacitation. Those are the custodial, where it means the transportation and incarceration. The mechanical meaning electronic monitoring, transmitter, psychological, and so on. Then the psychological and also the surveillance refers to special intensive supervision, video home monitoring, and community monitoring. Let's proceed to the third models of correction, which is the rehabilitation. Rehabilitation refers to helping patient who encounter such accident in terms of breaking his or her legs and cannot walk again, and if they have been traumatized or cannot remember anything, and many more. Those are the examples of people that will be put in rehab so that they can recover easily and as fast as they could. The main purpose of rehabilitation is to restore those offender back to its normal with therapy and training so that they will instill in their mind the good values and to avoid such crimes. Same thing to the other models, the rehabilitation also has its analysis. The advantages of rehabilitation is that you are safe in a public area, societal improvement, and humanity. For the disadvantages, it is difficult to accomplish it because it takes a lot of time, requires knowledges and science, hard work, and many more. Then the features are those stuff that can help for treatment, indeterminate sentence, and so on. Let's now move on to the fourth model of corrections, the deterrence. It means that avoiding such crimes or accident. Let's see the example provided below. So, in order to avoid or receiving a ticket, some drivers must increase or be careful in driving just like the crimes. In order to avoid it, we must be careful all the times. The purpose of this model is to conform the behavior of people to dictates of law to the dictates of law. The purpose of this model is to conform the behavior of people to the dictates of law to make sure that they will not cause more pain again. The deterrence analysis includes its advantages, disadvantages, and features of it. For advantages, public safety can save money and avoid such crimes. Then the disadvantages is that crime is not always rational, impulsive, addiction, miscalculation of pleasure, like offender overestimated the value of crime and sentencer underestimate the value. Another disadvantages of deterrence also is that miscalculate the pain, sentencer overestimate the value of crime, and so on. Let's proceed to its features. It is no more less pain than utility requires. Let's understand the deterrence aims and effects. For the general deterrence, punishment of any offender is intended to be an example. Then the marginal deterrence, effect in part but not complete. Example, armed versus armed robbery or weapon. Then the fifth and last model of correction is the restoration. The aim of this punishment is to develop arrange or repair the damage done to those victim and community by the offenders. Just like the other models, the restoration also has its basis, the advantages, disadvantages, and its feature. So all in all of those 5 models correction are so important. Next is the correctional system in the Philippines. So some prison inmates were eligible for parole and probation. Before serving their sentence, felons who were not charged with subversion or insurgency or had not been on probation before could apply for probation. And now let's define on what really prison is. I know most of us already know what prison is, but for us to make it clear and understand very well, the prison is the penal establishment under the control of Bureau of Correctional and shall include the new Bilibid prisons and other correctional institutions. The next is the competent authority. This includes the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, Regional Trial Court, Metropolitan Court, including the House of Representatives, Senate, and so on. Next is the inmate. Inmates talks about those people who committed crimes that may face a long-term imprisonment, like it takes more than 3 years and will fine more than 1,000 pesos. We also have detainee. This refers to a person who is confined in prison pending preliminary investigation, trailer appeal, or act of legal process issued by competent authority. So the detainee and inmate are somehow connected. Next is death convict. Refers to an inmate whose death penalty is imposed by a regional trial court. Next is the superintendent. This refers to a person who's in charge the prisons. And also we have carpeta. Refers to the institutional records of inmates which consists of mitimus commitment, order, prosecutor's information, and the decision of the trial court, including the appellate court. So next, let's move on to the prison administration. First is the correctional officer. They are the officer whose primary job is the security and movement of inmates. Next is the warden, the chief administrator of a prison. Warden serves as the boss or chief administration. Let's proceed to the next topic, which is the jails. A short-term multi-purpose holding facility that serves as a gateway for criminal justice system. So the jail holds defendants awaiting trial, defendants convicted of misdemeanors, and so on. Let's see to the next slides on what jails hold. Continuation of jails. So jails was being operated by county and city governments. Jails mostly inmates from the local community. House those who are awaiting trial or have recently been arrested. In addition to convicts, generally hold inmates who have been found guilty of minor crimes and serving sentences of less than a year. Next is due to smaller budgets tend to focus only on the necessities of safety, food, and clothing. Let's understand what's the purpose of jails. So the purposes of jails is to hold individuals pre-trial, temporarily hold juveniles awaiting transfer, to hold the mentally ill pending transfer. In population, the jail inmates are more likely to have been convicted of non-violent crimes than state inmates. Some of them were just pre-trial detainees, being arrested by police and unable to post bail, and innocent until proven guilty. Okay, so let's take a look the slides. So there are 40% of those in jail have been convicted of their current charges, and last 30 to 90 days, many inmates get credit for time served. Other than that, jail inmates include probation, parole violators, mentally ill juvenile, awaiting transfer immigration law violators. Given the slides above, you can see there the ranges for jail and to be followed by the next slide so that we will understand and learn about the jails or the ranges for jail. Moving on, let's continue to the country jails. So it's stated there that over 3,300 local and country jails vary in size from less than 50 to more than 7,000. Population has been more than doubled since 1983. Very few municipal jails. After jail, we also have prison. So let's define prisons. Correctional institutions for prisoners convicted of felonies. First, extend sentences. This will apply if a person commit another crime inside the prison. Next is separated inmates by sex so that there will be no intersection between girls and boys might happen, and also the architecture reflective of gender bias. Just like the jail, prison also has its function. First, prisons are operated by the federal and state governments. Two, hold inmates who may have lived quiet for a while before being arrested. Three, house only those who have been convicted of a crime. Next is generally hold inmates who have been found guilty of serious crimes and received sentences of longer than a year. Next, often after a wide variety of rehabilitation and educational programs for long-term prisoners. So, if we're going to look back to jail, we can say that prison and jail has a lot of similarities and they are somehow connected. Prison administration. So according to Carlson and Garnett in year 1999, states that prison administration fundamentally involves the application of both leadership and management techniques to correctional institution. For prison administration, deputy warden, we have security, guard forces, training, safety, prisoner discipline, 6. Investigations, 7. Visiting schedule. Under the deputy warden programs, we have treatment programs, medical services, number 3, mental health, number 4, recreation, number 5, classification, volunteers, and religious services. Let's take a look to what's being mentioned above about the prison reforms, including the next slides. State prison security have 4 levels, which is the minimum security, where it means having a few physical barriers to escape and many programs for inmates. Next is the medium security, like walled, self-contained institutions that offer inmates education, vocation, and rehabilitation. Then we also have maximum security, prisons most inmates at high risk of escape or who are dangerously violent to other inmates or staff. And the last one, we have the administrative segregation, solidarity for confinement. Prison record refers to information concerning an inmate's imposed criminal case, number in the trial and appellate courts, the date when the service of their sentence commenced, and many more. What does administrator do in a prison? A correctional administration involves managing personnel, budgets, and buildings, including hiring, training, and supervising correctional officers. Let's move on to the duties of prison administration. The administrative division of a prison providing a range of service in order to support the Department of Corrections and officers working in the prison. Let's understand the emergence of private prisons. So correctional facilities was operated by private corporations since we're talking about private prison. Also in private, there are approximately 130 private correctional facilities that being housed nearly 138,000 inmates. Let's see the future privatization in the corrections industry. So most experts see continued profitability for private prisons and also increase the federal prison population. And now let's define the Philippine prison system. It is composed of the institutions in the government, civil society, and the business sector that involves in confinement, correction, and restoration of persons charged for crimes. So how many are there or being incarcerated in the Philippines only? So as what you can see above, there are 117.3 thousand are being sentenced and detained in the Philippines as of May 31, 2021. Before anything else, let's understand first the history of the US incarceration system. So for United States, incarceration is a form of punishment of people who committed crimes. And US prison system states was to rehabilitate inmates in any form of states like incarceration, jail, prison, and solitary confinement. Those are for US. Let's now move on to the Philippines. We can see there that in the Philippines, year by year, there was a changes and it takes billions of people who are being incarcerated. There are three models of incarceration. First is custodial model, rehabilitation model, and reintegration model. So first, let's identify or define first the custodial model, where it means that emphasizing security, discipline, and other. The next, we have rehabilitation model. It emphasizes the provision of treatment programs designed to reform the offender. And the last one is the reintegration model. So it means that emphasize maintenance of offenders, ties to family and community as a method of reform in recognition of the fact that the offender will be returning to the community. Let's proceed to the four facts about the Philippines incarceration system. First is severe overcrowding. In 2016, Rodrigo Duterte won the presidential election and he promised to end crime within 6 months. Next is the pre-trial detainees. So there are 75.1% of incarcerations within the Philippines incarceration system are pre-trial in 2018 according to the World Prison Brief and so on. High death tolls. According to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, that about 5,200 inmates died in New Bilibid prison. These deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living condition, and inmate violence. For vigilante justice, on the time of President Duterte, he escalated the war on drugs like recruiting anyone who are jobless to kill those who are suspected of dealing, buying, or using drugs. Here are some possible fix. With increased awareness of the Philippines prison system, there is hope that conditions will be improved and vigilante justice will end. It will take time to fix the Philippines judicial and incarceration systems. And now let's move on to the earliest records of the prisons in the first millennia BC, located on the areas of mighty ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. So during those times, most of the prison was stationed in underground dungeons where guilty or suspected criminals that ends with spending their life either awaiting death sentence or a command to become slaves. The only exempted of that particular rules was the home of modern democracy, Greece. Their prisoners were held in the poorly isolated buildings where they could often be visited by their friends and family. In continuation of the earliest records of prison, let's take a look to this and the incoming slides for us to understand very well the earliest form of record in the prison. So it mentioned there that prisons were built almost exclusively underground with tight and claustrophobic passageways and cells. Prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or chained to the walls for life or for time. As slavery was accepted norm in those days, majority of prisoners that were not sentenced to death were sold as slaves or used by the Roman government as a workforce. And now let's move on to the next slide so that we will understand very well what's the earliest form of prisons. For the next slides, it is just only a continuation of earliest record of prison, so we must read it properly so that we will understand it very well. Here are some different types of prisons during antiquity in times. So if we're going to base it today, we can see there the difference of prisons in antiquity times. So much for that. Let's now move on to the religion's role in prison. Religion's value in prison is often about its contribution to the individual growth or development of a particular inmate. The focus is the perceived role of religion in helping lower the chances of recidivism among inmates Other reasons, it focuses on the immediate value that religions have for inmates through their help in their coping and survival. Also, the influence and practice of religion in the correctional setting is as old as the history of prisons. Initial entry of religion into prison was probably carried out by religious men who themselves were imprisoned. The Bible stories of such prisoners include Joseph and Jeremiah in the Old Testament, and John the Baptist, Peter, John, and Paul in the New Testament. Chaplaincy, religions, groups, and practices. Most of the direct influence of religion in corrections has been accomplished through the work of correctional chaplains. The term chaplain is believed to be derived from the Latin term capella, meaning a cloak. In the 4th century, the modern meaning developed from a story told about a soldier named Martin who shared his cloak with a beggar. That night, Martin dreamed Christ came to him in a dream, and he soon resigned from an army to serve as a soldier of God. Martin of Tours was later canonized by Catholic Church, and his cloak became a religious relic and was enshrined in a chapel. The specific kinds of religious groups vary from prison to prison and state to state. Nearly all state and federal correctional institutions provide support for at least some of the 4 traditional faith groups: Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, and Jewish. As the United States has become more diverse, however, there are a number of non-traditional faith groups that have surfaced in correctional facilities. They include variations of the 4 traditional groups in addition to the following. The religions, programs, and practices conducted by the different faith groups differ according to the beliefs of the group, inmate interest, amount of time and space available in the prison, competence of the religious staff, and the support of the correctional authorities. It is not uncommon for a large prison to have numerous religious services on a daily basis. Another institution that contains less diverse group of inmates might provide only a main Sunday services and 1 or 2 weeknight Bible study groups. Going back for the jails, institutions for short-term inmates and those awaiting trial or transfer may limit religious practice to a single service for all denominations called ecumenical service of even cell-by-cell ministry, whereby the chaplains from the different denominations visit inmates individually as requested. In many institutions, there are inmates who choose to practice their faith in a more private manner, and also they choose not to attend any formal services. In this case, the inmates may even develop their own personal religion that consists of a combination of traditional and non-traditional faith perspectives. To detain those who have violated probation of parole or have jumped bail, to house inmates awaiting transfer to prison, to operate community-based correction programs such as home confinement and electronic monitoring. That's all for my report about the institutional-based correction, and thank you for watching and listening. I hope you understand it.